Alright, guys, welcome back. I'm Ernie Flores, and this is Lazy Stoner Active Stoner. Become the successful person you always wanted to be while keeping it lit. So today's topic is actually a very interesting one. We're gonna go ahead and talk about the past. Some people say that we should let go of the past, but in this case, is always good to remember your history, so you know where you're coming from, as our good friend Bob Marley used to say. So we're gonna go ahead and talk about the 19th century cannabis parlors, which existed back in the 1800s, late 1800s, when the cannabis culture was accepted among the peoples. Of course, the peoples back then was not the peoples as today, but I mean, it was a very close ethnic accepted group, but they did accept it. Before we talk about that, though, we kind of have to talk about the history of hemp. So, for those of you that are not really familiarized with the works of Jack Herer, we're gonna go ahead and discuss a little bit of what he advocated for so much. So, a brief history of hemp. America, the greatest, established on libertarian principles and freedom of religion, seemed like a promising canvas in which one could paint the greatest civilization a mortal being has ever lived to see. We used to thrive in the wealthiest of economies, back when we did not wear clothes made of nylon, nor latex, back when we did not have drones, back when we did not have phones, nor cars, nor the internet. Back in a time when our paper, clothing, and many of our ordinary things were made out of hemp. Back in a dark era, when we mistakenly allowed a defenseless minority to carry on the burden of civilization's hard work. Based on biased and racist motives, and for this our economy is still paying the price, and will continue to pay the price until each one of its members, individually, thrives and becomes the best version of themselves, in order to benefit themselves and the whole. For America to recover the economic strength, we must aid the defenseless minorities that in our era are now represented by different ethnic and cultural marginalized groups. In order to recover America's full greatness, it is imperative to understand that in the words of the world's greatest economist, Adam Smith, no society can surely be flourishing and happy when most of its people are poor and miserable. That, I believe in essence, is the purpose of the enlightened and active stoner. Let us never again commit the crimes of the past, for we have our history to learn from. It will now be almost 100 years ever since the criminalization and demonization of the cannabis plant began. Although we experience a lack of liberty when growing, transporting, exporting, or ingesting mentioned plant, this was only a collateral effect, for it all began as a political tactic from several spheres, not targeting at all its medical benefits or THC therapeutic properties, but targeting the nature of the plant itself. For the new century had brought within new commodities and new plastic technologies, that in the next couple of decades we would learn that these commodities made of fossil fuels would come at a very high cost. There are several factors involved in the decay of the cannabis plant in the history of the United States. For hemp was a very strong and important raw material, very commonly utilized back in the mid and late 1800s. Ever since European settlers established in the Americas, the use of hemp was habitual. This plant was well known as a multi-purpose crop that was standardized for almost 300 years. In 1619, King James I from England decreed that the American colonists of Jamestown would need to produce more hemp in an attempt to step up efforts to their share towards supporting the motherland, being hemp a highly demanded material at the time. England also requested more hemp trade from India, and this allowed English businessmen from India to leverage without paying proper taxes, while taking advantage of local corrupt governments that allowed them to exploit the workforce. This went on for decades. Even when the United States was founded, the colonists would grow it to support its expansion of the Americas. Cannabis cultivation played a central role in the establishment of the United States, for it was used for paper, fibers, and wood replacement. Even George Washington, the first American president, grew hemp at Mount Vernon as one of his 3 primary crops. The use of hemp for rope and fabric became ubiquitous. There were no regulations on the importation of Indian hemp, also known as hashish, due to the fact that the amount of hemp produced in the US at the time was not sufficient to sustain the growing popular demand. According to the 1912 edition of Swedish Encyclopedia, Norstic Familjeblad, the European hemp grown for its fibers lacks the THC content that characterizes Indian hemp, but since the 1850s, medicinal preparation of cannabis started to kick off in American pharmacies. Following an introduction to its use in Western medicine by William O'Shaughnessy a decade earlier in 1839, and so the era of medical cannabis began. By 1853, recreational cannabis was listed as a fashionable narcotic and a popular stabilizer, although of private matter, very commonly accepted among the high classes. So, if we had a time machine, and we were able to travel 100 years before the retro era, before the 1980s, we could experience the real OG best time in marijuana's recreational history, until our era, of course. But let's dive back into the 1800s for a second, when the Oriental-style hashish parlors were flourishing alongside, unfortunately, opium dens. The hype was such a hit in the era that one could find at least one in every major city on the East Coast. In the 1800s, one was able to choose from 500 such establishments in New York alone, as described in an article that we will go ahead and read right now, in Harper's Magazine of 1883, attributed to Harry Humble Kane, describing a hashish house in the New York frequented by a large clientele, including males and females of the better classes. And further talks about parlors in Boston, Philadelphia, and Chicago. For those of you that don't know, Harper's Magazine is a really, really old magazine. It has been long way before than even Times Magazine or Rolling Stones or Men's Health or any other magazine that you've heard of. Maybe probably you've never heard of this magazine before, but I mean, you guys have to remember that back in the 1880s, magazines were like apps. Everyone read the newspaper. But young intellectuals preferred what was called periodicals, and those are magazines technically, So they became pretty popular, and it was a very, very used source of to share information or share curious facts and whatnot. So we're gonna go ahead and read this article while we smoke this blunt. Well, we have to roll it first. So while I roll and smoke my blunt, I will go ahead and read this article, which it's a conversation between someone that he knew in New York, and while he was visiting the city in November of 1883, he went to visit this hashish house. What I really like about this article is that it shows how in the beginning he didn't really think about me in New York, but I think that's something that we all go through. But personally, when before I started smoking pot around almost 6 years ago, I was incredulous about it. I was I didn't look forward to smoking it. I just thought it wasn't for me. I just thought it made you slow, probably. In some cases that I knew some other friends of mine that or hooked up into other things. So I mistakenly linked it to like any other drug, just like the federal government linked it to, classified it along with LSD and along with heroin and other narcotics, which is wrong. At the end of the day, my bad. It's something that it's worth looking into, and it's worth exploring for your own benefit. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about this. As I roll my blunt, I invite you, if you haven't already started sparking it, to join me on this beautiful session. And imagine the scene on this. It's 1883 November, so it's probably cold as hell in New York City. There were no cars yet. There was barely any electricity. It was a very rare commodity, actually, back then in that time. But just try to imagine it kind of like a Sherlock Holmes-ish scenery, like the Robert Downey Jr. one. So, a hashish house in New York, the curious adventures of an individual who indulged in a few pipefuls of the narcotic hemp. Harry Humble Kane, November 1883, Harper's Monthly Magazine. And so you think that opium smoking, as seen in foul cellars of Mott Street and elsewhere, is the form of narcotic indulgence of any consequence in this city, and that hashish, if used at all, experimentally by a few scattered individuals? That certainly is my opinion, and I consider myself fairly well informed. Well, you are far from right, as I can prove to you. If you care to inform yourself more fully on the subject, there is a large community of hashish smokers in this city, who are daily forced to indulge their morbid appetites, and I can take you to a house uptown where hemp is used in every conceivable form, and where the lights, sounds, odors, and surroundings are all arranged so as to intensify and enhance the effects of this wonderful narcotic. I must confess I'm still incredulous. Well, if it is agreeable to you, meet me at the Hoffman House reading room tomorrow night at 10 o'clock, and I think I shall be able to convince you. The above is the substance of a conversation that took place in the lobby of the downtown hotel between the writer of these lines and a young man about 38 years of age, known to me for some years past as an opium smoker. It was through his kindness that I had first gained access to and had been able to study up the subject of opium smoking. Hence, I really anticipated seeing some interesting phases of hemp indulgence, and was not disappointed. The following evening, at precisely 10 o'clock, I met the young man at the Hoffman House, and together we took a Broadway car uptown, left it at 42nd Street, and walked rapidly toward the North River, talking as we went. You will probably be greatly surprised at many things you will see tonight, he said, just as I was when I was first introduced into the place by a friend. I have traveled over most of Europe and have smoked opium in every joint in America, but never saw anything so curious as this, no experience any intoxication so fascinating yet terrible as that of hashish. Terrible. It's awesome. Are the habitues of this place of the same class as those who frequent the opium smoking drives? This guy wants to know is if the habits of hashish smokers are the same of the people that smoke opium. And the reason for this is because, well, we have to understand, like, right now, what we have of opium, we have several public health issues with opium. We've had for several centuries now. And it probably started back then. Like opium has been smoked for a lot of time by a lot of people. Then we have heroin, and then now we have fentanyl. All of these things that are causing public health issues. And not only that, but causing a lot of people to destroy their lives professionally, romantically, and just destroy their life generally, and no one really wants that. So if it's out of hand, it shouldn't happen. So that's why it's a public health issue, rather. Well, going back to this though, so this guy is asking if the habits of the people that smoke marijuana is the same as the people that do opium. And this is what his friend responds him. By no means. They are about evenly divided between Americans and foreigners. Indeed, the place is kept by a Greek, who has invested a great deal of money in it, and all the visitors, both male and female, are of better classes, and absolute secrecy is the rule. So it was like a kind of Fight Club thing here. The house has been opened about 2 years, I believe, and the number of regular habitants is daily of the increase. So it's getting bigger by the day, right? So I really like how they talked before, like English is obviously not my first language. I'm a Mexican American. I'm a Chicano, proud Chicano, and so I was born in Spanish first, but then when I started going to school, and then I started like having friends, and then started talking English, But I really like and enjoy how they talked English back then. It's interesting. Are you one of the number? He asks. I am, and find the intoxication far pleasanter and less hurtful than that from opium. Ah, here we are. They kind of want to make me roll my joint now, my blunt. So I'm gonna smoke Swisher Minis cigarillos, Swisher Sweets, diamond flavor, because I like diamonds. Alright. We paused before a gloomy looking house, entered the gate, and passed up the steps. The windows were absolutely dark, and the entranceway looked dirty and desolate. 4 pulls at the bell, a pause, and 1 more pull were followed by a few moments' silence, broken suddenly by the sound of falling chain, rasping bolt, and the grinding of a key in the lock. The outer door was cautiously opened, and at a word from my companion, we passed into the vestibule. The outer door was carefully closed by someone who I could not distinguish in the utter darkness. And a moment later, the inner door was opened, and never shall I forget the impression produced by the sudden change from total darkness to the strange scene that my eyes met. The dark vestibule was the boundary line separating the cold, dreary streets and the ordinary world from a scene of oriental magnificence. I imagine this place like I don't know if you guys have ever visited a hookah place, a hookah lounge. They usually have very comfortable seating, and you can just like chill there, and then it's pretty like oriental, like they have all this orders, and they have all this teas, and it's really nice. I remember I went with a buddy of mine in Ensenada, Baja California once, and it was really cool. It was really, really cool. If you ever happen to visit Ensenada, I totally recommend visiting that hookah shop. It doesn't really have a sign or a name outside. It's right around the corner from Papas and Beer. So if you ever happen to visit Ensenada, totally go there. Have a tea. He sells really good milk teas. He also gives the option of adding a salvia to the hookah. But I mean, that's up to you. I personally don't like it, so I didn't do it. But I mean, there's some people that do like that trip. So going back to the read here, on what Mr. Harry Humble Kane went through in this wonderful experience. We're gonna go ahead and find out on next episode because our time is up actually. So please follow us and share this segment if you enjoy it. Also, if you enjoy the story, we're gonna go ahead and find out everything on part 2 of the 19th century cannabis parlors on episode 4. So go ahead and hit next if you're really curious to find out what Mr. Harry Humble Kane went through in this wonderful experience. Once again, my name is Ernie Flores, and this is Lazy Stoner Active Stoner. Thank you so much for listening.